The Jets are looking for a new general manager after firing Joe Douglas. Let's talk about the top candidates for the job and, more importantly, the traits the top candidates should have today on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Wednesday, November 20th, 2024, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thank you so much for making the show your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes each day through the week, Monday through Friday. And this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code all lowercase LockedOnNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. Well, the Jets are searching for a new general manager. Yesterday, they fired Joe Douglas after 5.5 seasons with the team. And today we're going to talk about top candidates for the job, the guys I would really like to see the Jets go after for the general manager position. And more importantly, the traits that I think any top candidate should have, because I think that this job is unique. And I think it requires a certain skill set that maybe some other general manager jobs do not require. And I think the most important job far and away for any new general manager, it's not about being a great personnel guy. It's not about being a great scout. It's not about being a great salary cap guy. It's not about being a great innovator, although I think all of these things are important. The most important job for any new general manager is managing the owner, Woody Johnson, who I think any objective observer would say is completely out of control. And has been completely out of control for the last 2 years. And, you might even say he's been completely out of control the last 24, 25 years since he bought the team. Did you catch the article that came out in The Athletic last night about what's been happening with the Jets over the last 2 years with Woody Johnson? I mean, it was unbelievable. You should check this thing out. I mean, apparently the team was practicing yesterday because he ordered them to practice, as though, that's going to turn things around. The practice during the bye week that the owner mandates, the owner's got the pulse of the team. At 3-8, we're going to turn things around by calling a practice the Tuesday of the bye week. It was just full of unbelievable things, like Woody Johnson ordering the safety bench, Tony Adams. That's the reason Tony Adams was benched, was Woody Johnson ordered it. Woody Johnson was intervening in personnel moves, which we knew, but it was deeper than people realize, where he wasn't letting Joe Douglas offer a new contract to Bryce Huff. And the most explosive thing that came out of that story is that apparently after the Denver game, Woody Johnson seriously suggested that the Jets should bench Aaron Rodgers for Tyrod Taylor, 4 games into the season. So, as much as we mock Woody Johnson for changing the coach after 5 games, apparently the owner wanted to change the quarterback after 4 games, because when the owners decided who's the starting quarterback, that goes really well. Amazing stuff. I mean, it didn't break any new ground from the standpoint that we knew Woody Johnson was out of control. It's just interesting to fill in some of the whys and how Woody Johnson and the hows as to Woody Johnson being out of control. Now, when an article like that comes out on the day the general manager is fired, you have to use a little bit of discretion, because an article coming out that quick after the firing means that there's a very strong chance the general manager was one of the sources for the article, because typically stories like this come out and it's the general manager getting their side of the story out. But I actually kind of believe most of it, because Joe Douglas doesn't come off great in this article. Joe Douglas is essentially blamed for the Hassan Reddick mess. The article reports that Reddick's agents warned the Jets not to make this trade unless there was a new contract in place. And Douglas just figured Douglas saw the price. He said, well, I can get Hassan Reddick for a 3rd-round pick. I'll just make the trade. We'll figure it out later. Joe Douglas apparently was also the only person who bid for Tyron Smith. Apparently none of the other 31 teams even made Tyron Smith an offer. The other 31 teams all knew he was washed up. And even, the stuff like, why would you lie about, it's not like Joe Douglas looks great for wanting to offer Bryce Huff a contract, because Bryce Huff hasn't been that good this year. So it's not like Joe Douglas comes off looking great in this article, which makes me believe most of what we heard is true, but it doesn't matter, because that filled in the why and the how of Woody Johnson being out of control. I think everybody knows that Woody Johnson's out of control, and you need a general manager who can handle Woody Johnson. And that might be impossible, because this guy has no idea what he's doing. And the worst part is he thinks he's smart. See, The dumb person who realizes they're dumb, you can work with that, because the dumb person who realizes they're dumb says to themselves, I'm dumb. I'm going to screw things up if I get involved. They're at least smart enough to know that they're dumb. Woody Johnson's the dumb guy who thinks he's smart. So Woody Johnson, whenever he intervenes, thinks that he's fixing the team, and he's not. And any general manager who steps in needs to be able to handle that. Now, the best thing for the Jets would be to hire a professional CEO, somebody who's an athletic administrator from college or someone from the business world to take over Woody Johnson's job, to take over the day-to-day management. This person should hire the GM. This person should hire the head coach. Woody Johnson should no longer be involved with anything involving the day-to-day operation of this football team. And that would be the best thing that could happen to the Jets. It would change perceptions of the Jets overnight. And essentially, Woody Johnson would decide one thing. Woody Johnson would look at the work the CEO has done. Woody Johnson would have nothing to say over the football operation. He had nothing to say over the business operation. He would just hire this guy and he'd be done. And then at the end of every year, Woody Johnson could go to that guy. He could look at the job that the person's doing, decide whether he likes it and the CEO stays, or whether he doesn't like it and we need a new CEO. And that would improve the Jets. Now, do I have faith Woody Johnson could hire a good CEO? Not really, but it would give us a better chance, because there would be a lot of very qualified people who would want the job. So, but realistically, that's not going to happen. So realistically, it's going to have to come from the general manager. Now, this is like my dream scenario. There is a guy out there who I think might be able to manage Woody Johnson based on the job he's done in his current spot and based on his reputation across the league. And that's a guy who works with the Dallas Cowboys named Will McClay. And Dallas, although they've been a perennial disappointment in the playoffs, the reason they've been a perennial disappointment in the playoffs, the reason people get disappointed that they lose, is that their roster has been really, really talented, and they've been an excellent drafting team. And that's significant. But just as significant, Will McClay works around a very unique owner himself in Jerry Jones. And it's been well documented that Will McClay, he does not have the general manager title. Jerry Jones does. So that's one of the reasons he could conceivably be available, although he has been in Dallas a really long time and presumably could have left Dallas many times if he wanted to. And why would you leave Dallas for the Jets? If you've turned down other opportunities, why would you leave Dallas for the Jets? Well, we'll ignore that right now. Let's dream. Let's dream we can get somebody good in here. McClay is a guy who's kind of like gotten Jerry Jones to step back and done some common sense things. It's widely reported that a decade ago in the 2014 NFL draft, Jerry Jones wanted to draft Johnny Manziel. He was obsessed with Manziel becoming the heir apparent to Tony Romo, who was then the Dallas quarterback, who was then near the end of his career. And McClay was the guy who talked him out of it. McClay was the guy who said, we need Zach Martin, who was going on to have a Hall of Fame caliber career at the guard position. You're never going to win the headlines by drafting a guard over a quarterback, especially a quarterback as high profile as Johnny Manziel. But clearly that was the right move. And it's just a professionalism that has entered the Dallas organization that was not there before this guy had a lot of authority. Now, again, could the Jets get Will McClay? It would be tough. Would Woody Johnson be willing to take a step back? Can Woody Johnson be managed? I don't know. But we have to try and fix this team. Where the Jets are not going to fold up shop next year because of this Aaron Rodgers thing failing. So if we're talking about what the Jets should be searching for and the type of guy the Jets should be searching for and the traits that person needs, well, I think Will McClay of Dallas would be a great fit. But ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to turn our attention to another aspect of the Jets, because the Jets are always so behind the times. And I think it would be nice to see the Jets actually try and get ahead of the curve for once, try and be on the cutting edge of NFL teams as the league modernizes itself. And there's a candidate out there who I think might be able to help the Jets do that if they're interested. And I'll tell you who that candidate is and what he could bring to the table as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least two players for a shot up to win 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. And PrizePicks is the best way to win real money this football season. Which players are going off, which ones aren't? Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long on PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL. It's one word with no space, LOCKEDONNFL, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. This episode of Locked On Jets is also brought to you by ZBiotics. Pre-alcohol probiotic drink by ZBiotics is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink, alcohol gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make ZBiotics your first drink of the night, drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Here's how you use it. Step 1, drink pre-alcohol. For best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, and get a good night's sleep. Step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On NFL at checkout. ZBiotics is backed with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no questions asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL at checkout for 15% off. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listener, first watch every day. Big shout out to you everydayers. This is a daily podcast covering the New York Jets with new episodes Monday through Friday. And for you everydayers who want to send in mailbag questions, I'm sorry. The Jets keep getting in the way of our mailbags by making all these big moves on Tuesday. After the firing of Joe Douglas yesterday, we are not doing our weekly Wednesday mailbag show. Usually on Wednesdays, we do a mailbag with listener questions. Please continue to send in your questions. We'll try and get to a mailbag later this week. But today our focus is on potential general manager candidates for the New York Jets and the qualities they should have. And I have to say, one of the things that disappointed me about Joe Douglas is just how behind the times it seemed like he was. He came from two of the more forward-thinking organizations in the NFL. He started his career in Baltimore. He came to the Jets from the Philadelphia Eagles. I mean, those are two very respected organizations in this league because they're kind of at the cutting edge. And the Jets under Joe Douglas, it felt like they were anything but at the cutting edge. Joe Douglas had these old school scout sensibilities, and that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. You want quality scouting out of your front office, but he would obsess over measurables, and not in a good way. I think measurables can matter. Obviously, athletic ability manifests itself a lot on the football field, and obviously, you want a team that's more athletic than less athletic. You want a team that's bigger than smaller. You want a team that's stronger than weaker. But Douglas took these things to an extreme. It felt like very old school, very kind of like an outdated way of viewing the game. And Douglas had other things like, his obsession with trading up. And that hurt the Jets because the teams that draft the best tend to have the most picks. It's really important to hit in that round 3 to round 5 range in the NFL draft. It's documented. And Douglas was constantly trading up. He was constantly trying to move up for guys that he thought would put the team over the top. Again, that's an old school mindset. In the years past, there was this idea that, if there's a guy you love, you have to do whatever you can to go up and get him. Well, we now know that can be damaging. Every player has a price where it makes sense. Every player has a price where it doesn't make sense. And Douglas frequently looked undisciplined. The perfect example of this was Malachi Corley over the last NFL draft. And I'm not this isn't to write Corley off. It isn't to say we can yet declare Corley was a bad pick, but the Jets were trying to trade up. This is reported that the Jets were trying to trade up to 40 to get Corley. Corley fell all the way to 65. And the only reason he was taking the 65 was the Jets traded up for him. So the Jets tried for 25 picks to trade up for this guy. Nobody else in the league drafted him between 40 and 65. So that suggests that the Jets valued Corley much higher than most of the NFL, maybe the entire NFL, because the Jets valued him at 40. He fell all the way to 65. But the bigger point is that it showed a lack of patience, because if Douglas had been patient, he wouldn't have been trying to trade up. There's a good chance Corley would have fallen to where the Jets were picking at 72. So this is outdated stuff. I think the Jets need to modernize their team because the Jets are always behind the curve. The Jets are never at the cutting edge. There's a candidate, and it's ironic because the Jets got Joe Douglas when he was Howie Roseman's right-hand man in Philadelphia. And you normally would try and, I think conventional wisdom is that you don't go with a guy who's similar to the guy you just fired. Usually the replacement is entirely different from the guy you just fired. But somebody who really interests me is an assistant general manager with the Philadelphia Eagles, Alec Halaby. And he is in charge of analytics for the Eagles. He actually doesn't really have a big-time scouting background. He really doesn't have a scouting background at all. And that might scare people away, but I just think the NFL is changing. I think the league is modernizing itself. And I think the guys who are the old school scouting backgrounds who can't adapt, they're going to be left behind. The Eagles are as good of a team in the NFL at finding little advantages, whether you talk about game strategy, whether you talk about the way they evaluate players. And the GM job is becoming bigger. This is not just about scouting players anymore. It's not just about the old school, how did he run in the 40-yard dash? It's not just about, watching grinding the film. That stuff matters, of course. It has a place in the league, but these front offices are becoming bigger. They have analytics departments. They have, sports science departments. Player tracking data is becoming a very important aspect of the league as players train. Nutrition. These jobs are becoming much bigger. These front offices are becoming much bigger. It's becoming akin to baseball, what baseball went through 20 years ago, where the old school general manager, the guy who, sometimes he's a former player, he cut his teeth in the league by coming up the ranks through the scouting department. That's going the way that's going out of style. That's becoming very outdated. And it would be nice if the Jets, for once, were a team at the cutting edge, because it feels like the Jets are always chasing trends. It feels like they're always chasing trends when the trends have become outdated. Joe Douglas could have been, for all I know, Joe Douglas might have been a great GM 20 to 30 years ago with the way he runs the team, because very old school style. But new school is what's going to win in the NFL going forward. Analytics aren't going away. The role of analytics is not going to be decreased. The role of analytics is only going to increase. So again, like, would Alec Halaby want to come here? I think one of the challenges the Jets have is who's going to want this job, who's going to want to work with this owner. But what should the Jets be looking for? I think the Jets should be looking to try something new, because if you read like the profiles on potential GM candidates, the thing that comes up with Halaby is that was a risky candidate because he doesn't have a traditional football background. Well, is that the worst thing in the world? Especially in a league that's changing. The NFL is very resistant to change. The NFL has been a league that has been probably the most resistant of the four major sports to analytics. That's just like the NFL style. The NFL evolves very slowly, but we're starting to see things change. So eventually, every team's going to incorporate this stuff. Eventually, every team's going to dive headfirst into this stuff. Don't you want to be one of the first teams that does this? Instead of being one of the last teams that does this. And again, the nature of the job itself is changing. The idea that you can just have a guy who's a scout who doesn't care about any of the other stuff, the salary cap, any of the other aspects of the job. Again, that may have worked 30, 40 years ago. It doesn't work anymore. So that's the type of guy I'd be looking for. I'd be looking for somebody who can manage Woody Johnson like Will McClay. And I'd be looking for somebody who brings a new perspective to the table, somebody who's on the cutting edge, like an Alec Halaby. I think those would be two guys who would be excellent first two candidates for this team. But here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to now look at the opposite. I think there's a very specific type of candidate the Jets should look to avoid. I kind of teased it in this segment, but it would be very popular for the Jets to go out and get a big name to run their front office. But the big name might not be the right name. And I'll explain why as we continue here on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Jets. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Hillsdale College. Time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind-numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Well, our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free online courses, including Constitution 101, the meaning and history of the Constitution, Introduction to Free Market Economics, The Great American Story, A Land of Hope, and the Rise and Fall of the Roman Republic. If Hillsdale College ever invents a course how to run an NFL team effectively, I'll be the first one to sign Woody Johnson up. But all of Hillsdale's courses are self-paced, so you can start whenever and tune in wherever. Plus, you can go deeper with readings, quizzes, discussions, or just enjoy the lectures. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/lockedon to enroll. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. hillsdale.edu/lockedon. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Wednesday. We've been talking about the qualities the Jets should be looking for in a new general manager and potential candidates. But to end the show, I'd like to kind of change course. I'd like to talk about the type of candidate the Jets should not be interested in. And this is going to be a tough one because this is going to be a very popular type of candidate that's going to get floated an awful lot. I think there's going to be a push, especially in the media, to get a big name coach in here to essentially run the whole football operation. So, I've already heard names like Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll floated for this type of role, football czar. And I think we could rule Bill Belichick out because he has made it clear beyond any doubt that he does not respect Woody Johnson. I think that was clear even before the season. But now, if you've heard him on ESPN, if you've heard some of the things Belichick's had to say about Woody Johnson on ESPN, it's clear Bill Belichick has no interest in coming to work for the New York Jets, and that's no surprise because I think it was always a reach to think that Belichick would have any interest in working for Woody Johnson. But you'll hear other names. You'll hear Pete Carroll. You'll probably hear a lot of other names coming in straight out the front office. And it sounds great. Some big name that with credibility, some big name with a track record of success in the league. Here's the issue, though. These candidates frequently fail. Whenever somebody tries to do this, it hasn't worked. Miami tried it with Bill Parcells. They won a division title in 2008, his first year, but Parcells did not do a very good job. The Browns tried it with Mike Holmgren, the great coach for the former Packers and Seahawks coach. The Browns hired Mike Holmgren to run their football operation. He was in charge of the front office. He was in charge of everything. It did not work. I think there are a couple of components to this. Number one, the traits that make you a great coach are not the same traits that make you a great general manager. You could be a great coach. You could be a great motivator. You can be a great game planner. You can be a great schemer. You can figure out how to attack an opponent through X's and O's. That's different from managing a front office. That's different from evaluating talent. It's different from managing a scouting staff. And it's especially different from all the other stuff that we just talked about. And that's the other aspect of this, is that these guys tend to be older. They tend to be at the end of their careers, and they tend to be pretty resistant to change. And again, the NFL is a league that we're seeing a lot of change in. You want to be at the cutting edge of the NFL because the nature of the front office is becoming very different from what it's been. I think the next 5 years, we're going to see a tremendous amount of change in the way teams run themselves. We may see more change in the next 5 years than happened in the preceding 25 years combined. And I don't think you want somebody whose philosophies are set in stone. I don't think you want somebody who's old school right now, because old school is going to be left behind. I think there's a third element to this. And this is something maybe we can relate to because we've seen it happen in a different way. If you hire an old coach to be, run your entire football operation, to run the front office, he's probably going to hire people he knows. He's probably going to hire one of his old proteges as the head coach. That's what happened in Miami when Parcells hired the late Tony Sparano. It happened in Cleveland when Mike Holmgren hired Pat Shurmur. And we've seen the results of that with the Jets firsthand. Not so much in terms of hiring an old coach to run the front office, but back in 2015, when the Jets hired Charlie Casserly to run their general manager search. And who did Casserly hire? Casserly hired his old protege, Mike Maccagnan. And Maccagnan proved himself to be a guy who was in completely over his head. Was it a situation where Charlie Casserly was just trying to get his protege into a job? Probably. Was it a situation where Casserly was doing anything malicious? Probably not. I think Casserly, I think professionally, you look at guys who are your proteges with the same, with the same admiration, like a parent looks on a child. Charlie Casserly was probably really proud of what Mike Maccagnan had done in Houston as the director of college scouting. He probably thought very highly of Mike Maccagnan from the two working together, and he lost his objectivity. I don't think it's malicious. I don't think like you're scheming to get somebody who's unqualified into a job. I just think you lose sense of objectivity when you're talking about people, you've worked with, people you respected in the past. It's one thing to want to bring one of these guys in as the head coach. That's something that's in their wheelhouse. And we can have a debate about each of these candidates if they wanted to become the head coach of the Jets. But the qualities that make a great head coach they're like the polar opposite of what makes a great general manager or a great football czar or a great, whatever director of football operations, whoever's running the front office. They're very much at odds with each other because the coach has to focus on the day-to-day. The coach has to get the team ready for the next game. The coach has to focus on the upcoming opponent. The coach doesn't really have the luxury of thinking about the long term. Whereas the general manager, that job's all long term. After you built the team, your job is essentially done for the year. You might make a trade at the deadline. You have to fill out the practice squad. You have to sign injured players. But the GM has to focus with a long-term horizon. And that's one of the areas where I think when coaches move upstairs to the front office, they really struggle because coaches are so used to the here and now. They're so used on focusing on the next opponent. They're focusing on this week that they don't have the long-term perspective you need. And the Jets, certainly more than any team in this league, need to bring in somebody who's got a long-term perspective, somebody who's willing to build. And I don't think that bringing in, some big name from the past. Look, it's the type of thing that will certainly generate headlines. It's the type of thing that will certainly win you the back pages. You'll get a lot of praise from NFL Network again. You'll get a lot of praise from ESPN. But I think the last 2 years we've seen how much that praise is worth. Short-term praise in the moment is nothing compared to praise for actually winning football games. And I think if the Jets want to win football games, they can't look to the past. They can't bring in guys who used to be good coaches. They have to find the next great executive. Easier said than done in any circumstances. Easier said than done, especially in this circumstance where it's going to be very challenging, where this job is not going to be an easy one to fill. Look, it's still one of 32 GM jobs in the NFL. The NFL is the peak of your profession. They'll get somebody. The Jets have, and I shouldn't say the Jets, Woody Johnson has done everything in his power to make this job unattractive. They still have a chance to get somebody because somebody will view this as one of the 32 jobs. Somebody will have the ego to say, I can take on Woody Johnson. Hopefully they're right. And hopefully it's somebody who's a forward thinker, somebody who will bring the Jets to the cutting edge. That's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast for us, please give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching on YouTube and enjoy the show, give this episode a big thumbs up. It helps us out and helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Enjoy your Wednesday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.